Göbekli Tepe cost the equivalent of $400 million to build. This is a video about that thought experiment. The thought experiment goes like this. Imagine you're a developer. You've been hired to build a faithful, full-scale replica of Göbekli Tepe, the 11,500-year-old stone temple complex in southeastern Turkey's Upper Mesopotamia region. The client wants the real thing. 20 enclosures, 200 T-shaped limestone pillars, the largest weighing up to 20 tons each. The animal carvings rendered by hand. The whole thing built on a hilltop, using only the rough materials of the original site. And then, when it's finished, the entire complex is to be ceremonially buried, exactly as the original was, around 8,000 years ago. Your job is to assemble a budget. How much would it cost? Most people, ask this question, will guess in the tens of millions of dollars. The site looks, in photographs, like the kind of thing a determined construction crew could put up in a year. The pillars are big, but they aren't unimaginably big. The carvings are striking, but they aren't, say, the Sistine Chapel. Your job, though, isn't to guess. It's to count. And once you actually start counting, something strange happens to the number. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop at 10 million. It doesn't stop at 100 million. By the time you finish a serious estimate, the number you're looking at, in modern American dollars, is somewhere between 150 million and 400 million, possibly more. This is the story of where that number comes from, and of what it implies about the people who, 11,500 years ago, during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, did exactly this work. Without metal tools, without the wheel, without agriculture, without money, and possibly without writing. We'll walk through the budget, line by line, the way an actual modern construction firm would, and then we'll ask the question the budget forces on us. How could a hunter-gatherer society pay for this? Let's begin with the stone. Göbekli Tepe is built from limestone, specifically the soft Cretaceous limestone that lies in beds across the hills of southeastern Anatolia. By great convenience, the bedrock of the site itself is this same limestone, which means the builders didn't have to import their material. They quarried it from the ground beneath their feet. The largest pillars at Göbekli Tepe weigh, according to engineering estimates, between 10 and 20 metric tons. Many of them stand 5 meters tall or more, and an unfinished pillar still attached to its quarry bed nearby measures roughly 7 meters, which would have weighed somewhere around 50 tons had they ever managed to extract it. Across the full site, the cumulative mass of quarried, shaped, and erected stone is estimated by archaeologists to run into the thousands of tons. In modern dollars, the cost of quarrying that much limestone using equivalent traditional methods, that is, without industrial blasting, is roughly $40 to $60 per ton. For 10,000 tons of stone, the quarrying line on your budget comes out to between $400,000 and $600,000. That's the easy line. Now the stone has to be shaped. Carving a 5-meter, 10-ton T-shaped pillar from a rough block, by hand, with stone tools, is a process modern experimental archaeologists have estimated takes a small team of skilled workers, about 500 to 1,000 person-hours per pillar. At a modern stonemason's labor rate of roughly $50 per hour, that's $25,000 to $50,000 per pillar in carving labor alone. Across 200 pillars, the shaping line on your budget comes out to between $5 million and $10 million. That's before any of the decorative work. The animal reliefs at Göbekli Tepe aren't casual. They're deeply cut, anatomically precise, and stylistically consistent across the site. The carved vultures, the foxes, the scorpions, the lions, the wild boars. Each major pillar carries multiple figures, often in high relief. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, with its complex vulture and scorpion iconography, exemplifies this artistic sophistication. A modern stone sculptor working at this level of fidelity would charge somewhere between $100 and $200 per hour, and a single complex pillar's iconography might take 2 to 3 months of full-time work. If we estimate conservatively that 50 of the 200 pillars at the site carry significant relief work, the sculpture line on your budget comes out to between $3 million and $6 million. We're now at roughly $12 to $16 million and the stones aren't yet on the hill. Transportation is where the budget begins to get genuinely strange. The quarry at Göbekli Tepe is, conveniently, on the same plateau as the construction site. But the pillars still had to be moved from the quarry beds to the enclosures, a distance of, in some cases, several hundred meters across uneven terrain, without the wheel. Without draft animals trained to harness work, which wouldn't appear in this region for another 2,000 years. Without ramps, rollers, or any of the technology we associate with later monumental construction, modern experimental archaeology has tested how this kind of transport could have been done. The most plausible method is dragging the pillars on wooden sledges, lubricated with water or animal fat, by teams of 50 to 100 people pulling in coordination. A single 10-ton pillar, moved across a few hundred meters of uneven ground, would require somewhere between 20 and 40 hours of coordinated effort by such a team. That's roughly 2,000 person-hours per pillar. At modern construction wages, the transport line for 200 pillars comes out to between $4 million and $8 million. And then there's the erection. Standing a 10-ton T-shaped pillar upright, in a precisely engineered socket cut into bedrock, without cranes, without modern rigging, without any of the lifting technology of the last 3,000 years, is one of the most challenging operations in pre-industrial construction. The most plausible method, again from experimental archaeology, involves a combination of earthen ramps, wooden levers, hemp ropes, and the brute coordination of dozens of people working in shifts over the course of days. Modern reconstructions of similar operations on smaller stones suggest a single 10-ton pillar might require somewhere between 500 and 1,000 person-hours to erect safely. At construction wages, that's another $25,000 to $50,000 per pillar, or $5 to $10 million across 200 pillars. Then there's the design. Göbekli Tepe isn't random. The enclosures are arranged according to geometric patterns that, as a 2020 paper in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal demonstrated, follow precise equilateral triangles linking the central pillars of 3 different enclosures. The site was planned, not in the way a hut is planned, but in the way a cathedral is planned. The intellectual labor required to design Göbekli Tepe, the time spent surveying, marking, calculating, and supervising, isn't negligible. A modern architectural firm capable of producing comparable plans would charge somewhere between 5 and 10% of total construction cost. Add another $2 million for design. We're now at roughly $30 to $40 million, and we've only paid for the work directly visible in the finished site. This is where the budget breaks open. Because so far, we've been costing out the construction as if it happened in a single year, by a single specialized workforce, fed by a hidden supply chain we haven't yet accounted for. But Göbekli Tepe wasn't built in a year. It was built, used, rebuilt, and finally buried over the course of 1,500 years. What this means is the labor force has to be fed, housed, and supported continuously, across roughly 60 generations. There are no permanent houses at Göbekli Tepe. There are no agricultural fields. There are no granaries. The people who built and used the site, by all the conventional evidence, were hunter-gatherers, who continued to live the hunter-gatherer way of life, while also conducting one of the largest known construction projects in human prehistory. How did they feed the work crews? The archaeological evidence at the site itself is striking. Excavations have recovered enormous quantities of animal bone, primarily gazelle and wild aurochs, suggesting feasting on a scale that vastly exceeds normal daily consumption. There are also large stone basins, some with chemical residues consistent with the fermentation of grain, possibly into a form of early beer. The Notroff and Dietrich team at the German Archaeological Institute has argued, based on these finds, that the Göbekli Tepe builders were supplied through large-scale, ritualized communal feasting events, drawing in labor from across a regional network that stretched dozens, possibly hundreds of kilometers. In modern terms, this is a logistical operation comparable to feeding a small standing army. To put a modern dollar figure on it, consider what it costs to feed 1,000 workers in remote field conditions for one season. Currently, in the construction industry, the per-worker daily cost for food, water, and basic shelter at a remote site runs around $50 to $100. Across a single 100-day construction season, that's between $5 and $10 million in food and logistics alone. Now extend that across 60 generations of intermittent but ongoing work. Even at low intensity, the cumulative food and logistics cost over the lifetime of the site runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Added up, quarrying, shaping, carving, transport, erection, design, food, logistics, lifetime support of the workforce across 15 centuries. The total budget for replicating Göbekli Tepe, in modern American dollars, lands somewhere between $150 million and $400 million, with most serious estimates clustering around $200 million. For comparison, The modern construction of the Tom Bradley International Terminal at LAX cost about $1.7 billion. The Burj Khalifa cost about $1.5 billion. The original Sydney Opera House cost about $102 million in 1973 dollars, which in current money is around $700 million. Göbekli Tepe, in other words, is in the same order of magnitude as a construction project as a modern international airport terminal or an iconic national monument. Built by people who, by every conventional anthropological definition, were small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. Karahan Tepe, its sister site 46 kilometers away, shows the same deliberate burial patterns and monumental T-shaped pillars. The broader Taştepeler project has now identified over 20 similar sites across this region, suggesting an entire network of pre-pottery Neolithic monument builders. This is the part of the budget the standard model of prehistory doesn't know how to absorb. Because if a hunter-gatherer society, with no agriculture, no permanent settlements, no metals, no wheel, and no money, could build something equivalent in scale to the Sydney Opera House, that means we have to revise everything we thought we knew about what hunter-gatherer societies could organize. The amount of surplus food, of social coordination, of long-term planning, of accumulated specialized knowledge required to produce Göbekli Tepe is, simply, not what hunter-gatherer societies were supposed to have. What this implies, the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt argued before his death in 2014, is that the standard timeline of human civilization has the sequence backward. The textbooks say that agriculture produced surplus, surplus produced cities, and cities produced monuments. Göbekli Tepe suggests, instead, that the urge to build monuments produced the need for surplus. The need for surplus produced agriculture, and agriculture, eventually, produced the cities. In other words, the monumental came first, and the rest of civilization followed it, dragged along by the logistical requirements of the work. After Schmidt's death, researchers under Nekmi Karul and Lee Clare at the German Archaeological Institute have continued the work, and their findings only deepen the mystery. If Schmidt is right, then Göbekli Tepe isn't the temple of a forgotten civilization. It is, in some sense, the spreadsheet that started civilization, the first project so large and so long that the people involved had to invent a new way of feeding themselves in order to keep working on it. The trillion-dollar question, then, isn't where the money came from. The trillion-dollar question is what could possibly have been so important to a small band of hunter-gatherers that it justified, across 60 generations, the equivalent of a major modern airport in construction effort. We don't know. What we do know is that they did it. They quarried, carved, transported, erected, fed, housed, and supported a workforce capable of producing a project of this scale for 15 centuries. Then, when they were finished, they covered the entire site in dirt and walked away. The line on the budget that should give every modern developer pause is the one that comes after all the construction lines. It's the decommissioning cost. A modern client who builds a $400 million monument and then deliberately buries it isn't behaving according to any economic logic we currently recognize. But somebody, 11,000 years ago, did, and the line on their budget for that decision must have been the most expensive one of all.